Good afternoon to you. Mark Sott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for the 16th of March 2016. Happy Wednesday to you. I've been real busy the last week or so dealing with the flood situation in Texas. My colleague and I working to cover that event there, and back in the office today, and I figured it was time to put out an update to see what's going on as we look ahead to the hurricane season, now less than 80 days away, and a few things that relate to that, and then a broad look at the lower 48 weather as of now. Pretty active pattern going on. So let's get right to it, shall we? First of all, sea surface temperature anomalies valid on the 14th, as you can see right there on the timestamp. And you notice the El Nino fading away here very steadily. No surprise there. The Atlantic main development region, though, is getting very warm compared to average. Look at all of this color in here, this orange and red, starting to really show up and fill in between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. That's what the CFS V2 was suggesting would happen during the spring, and there it is. But you notice, too, the Northeast Atlantic, very cold compared to normal, and that's different than we are used to seeing, and not really part of what we call the warm AMO period, or Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. So there's going to be an interesting twist to the upcoming hurricane season, perhaps. How much does this cold water compared to normal matter? If the MDR down here, what we call the main development region, continues to warm significantly, it's tough. It's hard to say because we haven't seen this right here while we've had a very warm MDR that I can remember. So maybe some challenges ahead. Add to that the fact that this area is supposed to continue to cool significantly, and you start to see here some cooling south of the Baja. In other words, the Eastern Pacific cooling off. So, the Atlantic could be very favorable, but what's the wild card with this right here? How does that play in? It'll be interesting to see what the experts think about that. Those with PhDs. I merely hold a bachelor's degree in geography with earth science as my focus. So not for me to make that choice or determination. We will rely on higher ups. Let's look at it that way. But one thing I can do is we can certainly look at the maps, as in, that's what geography really is all about. Maps, the people on the maps, the places and the things on those maps. And I like to focus on what the weather does to our geographic makeup. And these maps are incredible. If we go back and look on the first few days of 2016, as just a comparison here, very warm in the Pacific, fairly cool in the open Atlantic here, very warm in the Western Atlantic. But then look what happened as we go to now. There's a profound difference. You see, even the northern Pacific around Hawaii and points north was quite warm at the beginning of the year, and now that's cooling off substantially, while the Atlantic in the deep tropics warms and the Pacific in the deep tropics begins to cool. Another way to look at it is through the cross section here, the equatorial temperature anomaly down to around 450 meters deep, and this is the very latest update centered on March the 9th, and you can really see here there's only a thin area of abnormally warm water at the surface and just a little bit below, whereas the cold tongue, if you will, really starting to extend itself eastward. And I'm not sure what to make of this here. That's way down deep, and we won't worry about that. This is the more substantial element to keep our eyes on, and it's continuing to expand and erode away at that El Nino, and I think that's going to make for a busier hurricane season, which we can talk about more maybe when we get into early April or something like that. Once we close to within 60 days, I'll show you some things that I have been looking at to help understand what might happen. Remember, this is just looking at patterns that could be conducive for development. It'll tell us nothing about where anything that does form ends up. So take it for what it's worth. We can look at the puzzle pieces, but even when you put them all together, sometimes the picture still remains fuzzy. I think that's a pretty good analogy. You have all the puzzle pieces, and when you put them together, it's a fuzzy picture. So what good is it, right? It's, not completely useless, but it might be a little fuzzy. All right, so let's switch to lower 48 weather, shall we? A lot going on. We had some tornadoes and other severe weather in parts of the Midwest yesterday. Calming down a little bit today, though, some pretty high winds. Less severe weather, just more of a windy pattern. And some of those winds are quite strong. I want to focus, though, down here along parts of the Gulf Coast states where, again, that massive flooding took place and is still taking place. Interstate 10, as far as I can tell here, still closed in portions of Texas and Louisiana at the border near Orange, Texas. From Lake Charles to Orange, you can forget it. You got to find an alternate route. I'm going to look at this graphic here separately in a minute. First, I want to show you the rivers and lakes here, which will take us to the West Gulf River Forecast Center and their awesome web page. And we can click on these gauges and see what's going on. Looking at the Sabine River here, I'll trace it for you. The Sabine River from the Toledo Bend Reservoir emptying into that recently swelled beyond its banks and flooded numerous communities. Fortunately, these are small communities. Unfortunately, they still had to suffer this flooding. We're talking about major flood stage here near Bon Weir. Hopefully that's how you pronounce that. Still in major flood stage at Deweyville, where we had 2 cameras set up. I'll talk about that much more next week, show you some of the results. Thousands of people tuned in to watch those live feeds that we set up, and we did receive a lot of appreciation for that, which makes us feel good. We provide it as a free public service, so it's great to see people utilizing it. And if I click on this, this will show you that the flood stage here in Deweyville, fortunately, starting to go back down. It's going to be a gradual curve, unfortunately, not just a sharp drop-off, but it'll eventually, by Monday, get below major flood stage, and that area can start drying out. Farther to the south, in Orange, Texas, again, along the Sabine River, still having major flood conditions here. And if we click on this and expand the gauge to full view, you can see that cresting today for the most part and holding steady for quite a while in major flood, possibly through early next week, maybe certainly late into the weekend. It did not reach the record in Orange, Texas, which is great. Do you know when that record was set? It was Hurricane Ike in 2008 from the storm surge. So a pretty bad situation in that part of the country. This is a graphical, almost an infographic representation of it. So luckily, Burkeville starting to come down, but again, Bon Weir still high, Deweyville still high, major flood, and as I mentioned, Orange. But luckily, all of these have crested, and the river levels will start to go down. However, coming up soon, in the next few days, this sort of front lays across here like a stationary front, focusing mechanism, high dew points, and precipitable water values, going to squeeze out, unfortunately, possibly more than an inch of rain in some of these areas that are being hard hit right now, with a bullseye of very heavy rain in excess of 2 to 3 inches along parts of the I-10 corridor in Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi perhaps. So if you have travel plans across this area, you need to be paying attention, because some of these streams and creeks aren't going to tolerate, I would say most of them, not going to tolerate an additional inch or 2 or 3 or more of water. So you need to be weather aware and be willing to change your plans, perhaps substantially, to find an alternate route to where you're going. Please pass that along to anyone that has travel along the I-10 corridor here. It could be tricky over the next few days for sure. Then, on top of all of that, a potential last hurrah nor'easter for the Northeast, maybe parts of the Mid-Atlantic as well, but I think the biggest brunt of the effects in terms of snow, wind, and rain and at the coast will be in New England proper. The Euro showing a pretty stout system, the GFS agreeing with it for the most part. When you see these isobars, or lines of equal pressure, packed in here tight like this at the surface, it indicates that the wind speeds are pretty high. It's a tight pressure gradient. The difference in the pressure over distance is pretty steep, and so we call that a steep pressure gradient. I'm just kind of filling it in myself to give you an idea. That shows a lot of wind right there. So if you're in New England, you're probably already aware of this. The snow lovers up there, and the snow haters too, certainly keep an eye on this and see what's happening over the next few days. This could get interesting. One more sort of last winter storm, nor'easter kind of thing moving in. We saw that at the end of 2014's winter season along Cape Cod, a very strong storm. I was up there for that actually at the end of March. It was around March 25th, 2 years ago. So this is not uncommon, but I think at this time of the year, okay, get it in, get it out, and then let's have spring. Baseball season is upon us, and let's get that underway and show winter the door. So a lot to keep an eye on. Things busy this time of year, transition part of the year as we are into spring. Meteorologically speaking, on the calendar we will enter spring next week, and hurricane season coming up, severe weather season in full swing. We're having these river floods, and then still winter trying to poke its finger in our eye, in some areas anyway. So there's a lot to keep up with, that's for sure. All right, well, that's it from me for today. Have a good rest of your Wednesday, and as always, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll be back next week. Not sure exactly what day, but we can count on something for you sometime next week.